B. Collins.
Peter B. Collins, News and Comment. It's Monday, February 12th, 2018. It's been a wild weekend. Distractions like the Olympics coverage from South Korea. Whole lot of stuff going on. I'm going to try to catch you up today with some important news and my personal commentary on it. And if you're new to this podcast, what I do every day is cull through the reporting, look for what I see as about the best 10 stories, the most important that I think you need to know about, and then I bring you the news and my unvarnished comments. I'm a man with too many opinions, and I hope I don't disappoint in that regard. So there's a real head-scratching story that underscores the point I made a couple of days ago, borrowing the phrase from Professor Stephen Cohen, that this may not be about Russiagate, but about Intelgate, about the intelligence community. And in a story exclusive to the New York Times that appeared on the Saturday paper, and that is once again based on anonymous sources, well-placed leakers, they report that the CIA spent the better part of 2017 trying to track down the stolen cyberweapons from the NSA's armory. And they were tracking a shadowy Russian guy all across Europe using an American as a cutout. And he asked for $10 million initially for the return of the cyberweapons, and he threw on just a little whipped cream and cherry on top. He said he also had some dirt on Donald Trump that he'd love to pass along. Then suddenly the price dropped from $10 million to $1 million. Drawing the spooks in even further. And they actually paid him $100,000 as a down payment, a suitcase full of cash delivered, I believe, in Berlin. And ultimately, the guy delivered almost nothing. Some news accounts, secondhand, warmed-over stuff about Trump. But he said that, well, he had planned to return the cyber weapons, but somebody in Moscow told him that he couldn't. And this underscores the deep and recent failures of our intelligence community. They failed to discern the advancement of the weapons and missile programs in North Korea. And each agency has had deeply embarrassing hacks of its prized cyber weapons, including the tools that enable one set of spooks to conduct an operation and blame it on somebody else, as I surmise happened in the leak of the DNC server information that has been characterized as a Russian hack with absolutely zero public evidence. So this caper ended badly for the CIA, like so many. And why this has become public is my biggest question. Because the spooks, from my point of view, probably had a good shot at keeping this one covered up. There's no indication that the Russians leaked it. So I find this really interesting. The Times says the Americans desperately wanted the hacking tools. The cyber weapons had been built to break into the computer networks of Russia, China, and other rival powers, and instead they ended up in the hands of a mysterious group calling itself the Shadow Brokers. Now, let's be clear about something. If I pirate software from you, let's just say Microsoft Word, all right? I can return the disk to you, but I've still got the goods. Now, it appears that primarily the agencies were trying to find out exactly what was stolen. They have such bad inventory control of their digital weapons. You can call it an armory, but it's just stored on servers like everything else. And that is the biggest doubt they had with Ed Snowden as well. So these agencies present themselves as almost omniscient, godlike in their powers. But the truth is, they have twin feet of clay. And this underscores my discomfort to see so many Democrats, so many people who call themselves progressives, so many people who opposed George W. Bush when he created the new police state here in the U.S. with the Department of Homeland Security, the expanded powers of the Patriot Act. Obama cemented all those in place and built new structures on them. And now Trump has the keys, the codes, and compliant cronies who will do his bidding. And this is truly an ugly picture. And so when you hear Rachel Maddow or Adam Schiff talking like the FBI has never done anything wrong, and that Trump's attacks on them are so unfair, and that questioning the validity of the FISA court is somehow un-American, well, it makes my bald little head spin. So late Friday, as I predicted, there were dumps of documents and information, and Trump announced from the White House that he is unable to declassify the Democratic memo that was written in rebuttal to the Nunes memo, crafted by Republican staffers over there at the House Intelligence Committee, where I mentioned they're building partitions, physical partitions, inside the committee offices to separate Democrats from Republicans. Now, this is pure bullshit, as were the claims that the Nunes memo couldn't be released because sensitive sources and methods would be disclosed. And what turned out to be sensitive was the identity of Christopher Steele, who we've all known about for over a year, even though we didn't find out until, 9 months into the year that the dossier of Steele had been paid for secretly by a law firm retained by the Democratic National Committee and the Clinton campaign. Now, this is pure politics. And Adam Schiff, the ranking Democrat on that House Intelligence Committee, is promising to redraft it and scrub it so that it will pass muster. But these games that we've been seeing are not new. The idea that something is secret that we all know about has been in play over domestic surveillance and many, many other issues. For example, right now at Guantanamo, there's a big squabble because they have fired the guy called the convening authority. And one of the issues is they're trying to keep the defense attorneys from citing the location of the CIA black sites where the high-value prisoners, like those accused of the 9/11 issues, were held. There are no secrets about Thailand and Poland and a couple of other places where the black sites were located. But they play this shell game where, that can't be introduced as testimony at Guantanamo because it's secret. There is a clear-eyed analysis of the Nunes memo and a recap entitled What We've Learned in Year One of Russiagate. And Aaron Mate, M-A-T-E, has surfaced as a bright young journalist. He appears on the Real News Network, and if you haven't seen his interview with Luke Harding, the British author of the book Collusion, which claims to have information supporting the Trump-Russia narrative, but doesn't really, it's priceless. You should see it. But published on Friday at thenation.com, this article goes into great detail, and I've linked to it in the show file for today's podcast. Please take the time to read it yourself. Mate begins with comment on the Nunes memo. He said, while it makes a plausible case that a surveillance warrant of campaign volunteer Carter Page was obtained on questionable grounds, it also acknowledges that it was another campaign aide, George Papadopoulos, who triggered the opening of the FBI's Trump-Russia investigation 3 months earlier. He goes on to say, many of Trump's political opponents remain tethered to the eventual emergence of proof that his campaign colluded with the Russian government in order to win the presidency. But the evidentiary basis so far for Russiagate is thin, to say the least. And he links to the originating articles or reference points of this summation. High-level officials and investigators have repeatedly acknowledged there is still no evidence so far of coordination between the Trump orbit and Russian government over the release of stolen emails or any other campaign matter. There is only a curious cast of characters that makes for an unlikely conspiracy. Then he goes into the Papadopoulos story and how the murky British professor Joseph Mifsud has said that he never told George Papadopoulos that he knew about dirt that the Russians had collected on Hillary Clinton. Then he talks about the now infamous meeting in June 2016 at Trump Tower, arranged by Rob Goldstone and Natalia Veselnitskaya, this Russian lawyer who came along with some of her pals, and it featured top campaign members and the family of Trump. Goldstone, a former tabloid journalist turned music publicist with a proclivity for funny hats, informed Trump Jr. that Veselnitskaya had incriminating information on Hillary Clinton as part of Russia and its government's support for Mr. Trump. Now, exactly what was that? I speculate that it related to uranium-1. But it has been taken in many different directions and never really defined. And Mattei says Goldstone floated something totally different in his emails, on its face immaterial to the election results. Furthermore, NBC News, the hotbed of the Russiagate story, including its cable news channel, MSNBC, they note no evidence has emerged publicly to contradict Veselnitskaya's account that she wanted to press a case about the U.S. Magnitsky Act. Moreover, no evidence has emerged publicly that connects the Russians in the meeting with the Russian intelligence effort to interfere in the 2016 presidential election. Nobody's ever alleged that Cozy Bear or Fancy Bear ever made it to Trump Tower. Then he goes into the Steele dossier, and the best comment so far that's come from somebody validating the dossier is now former FBI Director Andrew McCabe, who said the only thing corroborated is the fact that the Trump campaign advisor Carter Page had traveled to Moscow, which, of course, was not a secret. So I encourage you to see this because Aaron Mattei has really surfaced. He's just been writing about these issues for The Nation for less than 6 months now. And here's a priceless quote. When he talks about the alleged use of Facebook and Twitter to manipulate the election, he talks about the New York Times musing on the Facebook page for dog lovers. It was a group for animal lovers with memes of adorable puppies. And the Times speculated the goal of the dog lovers page was more obscure, but some analysts suggested a possible motive to build a large following before gradually introducing political content. And Mattei says we may never know if vulnerable American dog lovers were compromised by the Russian puppygandists. Nice pun. Anyway, he notes what we've told you before, that more than half of the measly $100,000 in Facebook ads attributed to Russian-linked accounts ran after the election, and he nails it down. In the critical states of Michigan and Wisconsin, the ads were seen less than 1,000 times. Purported Russian ad spending amounted to about $2,000 in Wisconsin, all but $54 during the primary, and under $1,000 in Michigan, only $300 in Pennsylvania. And that aligns with what I've been telling you, that yes, these things occurred, but they did not have the kind of impact that the algorithms at YouTube, the excessive publicity given to Trump every time he tweeted, those pictures of his empty podium waiting for him to show up while they ignored speeches from a Clinton or a Sanders. So, and here's one last bite from Aaron Mattei. The Russian influence theory is so ingrained that Democrats see no irony in invoking it to dismiss the conspiracy theories of Republicans. Denouncing the current right-wing uproar over alleged anti-Trump bias at the FBI, Senator Chuck Schumer cautioned that in pushing conspiracy theories with virtually no fact, the Republicans wittingly or unwittingly acting as allies of Russia's disinformation campaigns and playing right into Putin's hands. So check out Aaron Mattei's piece. I think that it is really important and raises a lot of the important issues that you should consider before you fall into line with the left-wing consensus and the kind of blind embrace of the FBI and the intelligence community overall. At Consortium News, Philip Giraldi, who's been a guest on this program many times and was bounced from the American Conservative for speaking the truth about Israel, Well, he follows up on the Nunes memo, and he said that it does provide strong reason to believe that there was unwarranted and quite possibly illegal FBI surveillance of Carter Page. But meanwhile, regarding the key allegations of election meddling at the heart of Russiagate, the 9-month-long investigation of Special Counsel Mueller into Moscow's possible interference has so far only shown that it was Israel, rather than Russia, that meddled with the campaign by meeting with Trump associates and seeking favors. And that is true. He also goes on to say that the whole thing has kind of spun out of control. At the end of January, the U.S. Treasury Department released the names of 210 alleged Kremlin insiders, including government ministers, who are being put on a list for possible sanctions. Now, this can be construed as American interference in the March national election, where Putin is expected to be reelected handily. Now, our meddling will not matter because it's not close, but we just have to be honest that we feed a lot of this to ourselves. Even conservatives over at, National Interest, a guy named Ted Galen Carpenter, notes with amusement that the Democrats and their allegations have become increasingly shrill and over the top. And he quotes John Heilemann on MSNBC asking Senator Chris Murphy of Connecticut, Democrat, is it possible that we actually have a Russian agent running the House Intel Committee on the Republican side? And that wasn't the first time that Heilemann had raised that. Now, I have nothing good to say about Devin Nunes, but I don't for a minute think that he is any more than a toady and crony of Trump. And to suggest that he's working for the Russians, I think, is simply absurd. And a woman I've long respected, Jackie Spear, Democrat from here in California in the Bay Area, she insisted that Russia's activities are indeed an act of war. And her colleague from across the Bay, Eric Swalwell, said we were attacked by Russia, and that attack was ordered by Vladimir Putin. No facts are required. No, not at all. Over at Alternet, Stephen Rosenfeld takes a look at the claims that Russia interfered and its hacking extended to the election process. We know that there was this unfocused report that there were as many as 21 intrusions by Russian hackers into state or local election facilities. Well, it turns out that only one has been confirmed, and there's a bit of debate about whether that was Arizona or Illinois. But they keep hyping this, saying 2018, the Russians are going to interfere. Now, you can make a plausible case that in a presidential campaign, an outside player of any sort might have some impact with the right resources and tactics. But the idea that from Russia or North Korea, that hackers can manipulate the voting in thousands of jurisdictions across the country is just crazy. And Rosenfeld points out that in the state of Michigan alone, let me find it here, there's something like 1,000 different election systems in use, which may mean, it may explain why whoever messed with the results in Detroit just went directly to Wayne County. Here it is. In a state like Michigan with more than 1,600 different local and county election jurisdictions, each with separate voting systems. Now, that decentralization is a benefit in this case, but it's often, it enables people to manipulate the vote at a local level. And fundamentally, we need hand-counted paper ballots if we want true election results. A little more on the Russiagate mess from Glenn Greenwald, who goes after one of his former idols, Harvard law professor Lawrence Tribe, who he now describes as a deranged Russia conspiracist. Because over the weekend, you may know, a Russian jet, a passenger airliner, crashed after takeoff near Moscow, 71 people, all killed on board. And Lawrence Tribe, he said, among those killed in the tragic plane crash yesterday, Sergei Milyan, a Papadopoulos friend who had emailed Kushner and is said to be behind one of the most salacious claims in the dossier on Trump's involvement with Russia. Probably just coincidence, he suggested snarkily. Then later he dialed it back, and still later he said sorry if I rang a false alarm. The same Lawrence Tribe co-authored an op-ed in today's New York Times asking not if Devin Nunes is a Russian agent, but if he is obstructing justice. Now, this is a legitimate question. And while I don't agree with all the arguments that Tribe and his colleagues advance here, you can build a plausible case that if Trump is obstructing justice, that Devin Nunes is aiding and abetting. Every day I pause for a second to thank the people who support my work here at the Peter B. Collins Podcast with your subscriptions. And I really appreciate those who support me. People like Barbara Ruther, who just took out a new annual subscription, and Paul Lacombe, and Dean Peters also took out a new annual subscription, joined by long-term subscriber Sandra Fish, who does a little more than she has to every month. So I invite you to join them. I need your help to replace some subscribers who've fallen off for whatever reason. And I invite you to visit peterbcollins.com. Click on the menu tab, no matter what device or browser you're using. Pull it down, takes you to become a subscriber. That's the sign-up page. And if you're allergic to PayPal, you can always just donate by sending a check, money order, or paper money, we don't like coins, to my P.O. Box, 150-660, San Rafael, California, 94915. That's P.O. Box 150-660, San Rafael, California, 94915. Today, I had a great conversation with globe-trotting, international, independent journalist Reese Erlich. And I called him to talk about a story he recently did about the report about a year ago that American diplomats in Havana, Cuba, were being made ill and reporting some odd symptoms that were attributed to an unknown source, but the speculation was it was some sort of a sonic weapon. Well, Reese Erlich went back to Cuba in January and ran down the story, and here is what he had to say.
First of all, no such sonic weapon exists. Secondly, if it did, it would have to fit on the size of a truck and be parked out in front of the diplomats' homes. And third, such a sonic weapon, if it existed, could not have caused the kinds of damage that was the U.S. claimed, particularly concussions. Sound waves don't cause your head to flap back and forth and give you a concussion. So the whole story, the whole theory just fell apart upon any kind of an actual investigation.
That's Reese Erlich from our fresh, in-depth interview released to my subscribers today at peterbcollins.com and most of our outlets. We're going to hear again from Reese Erlich in a couple of minutes because he's also done a lot of original reporting on the war in Syria. But first, Trump delivered a dead-on-arrival budget plan today because it was made moot or useless by last week's deal with a partial or momentary government shutdown over the budget that was finally approved by the House and the Senate very early Friday morning. And what this blueprint, which is meaningless, but it shows the intentions, and we can expect that similar plans will resurface in future years. But they are trying to take the deal that was struck that gave an additional $195 billion, that number's higher than it was on Friday, to the Defense Department, and the balancing item is to increase non-defense domestic spending by $131 billion over the next 2 years. Now, Trump is saying he wants to take most of that money that is earmarked for domestic spending and either cut it completely from the budget or shift it to the Pentagon, as if they need more money over there. So this is scary. And what is equally frightening to me is plans to privatize public facilities, like National Airport. I don't call it Reagan. You understand why. And Dulles Airport. That's the big one in Virginia where the international flights come in and out of, and both are publicly owned. But along with some parkways in the Beltway area, the Tennessee Valley Authority, the Bonneville Power Administration, they want to put this up for sale and allow private interests to buy it and run it. And this is just a recipe for extortion and ultimate disaster. And when California was on the ropes, when the worst governor in recent years, Arnold Schwarzenegger, was in charge, he had said he would cut up the credit cards and reduce the debt of California. But he couldn't get any tax increases through the legislature at a critical time. And so he went to the pawn shop. And he offered to sell some California state government buildings. I think the Coronado Bridge in San Diego. And it was a list of about a dozen assets. And they were put up on the block. Deals were cut to sell them to predatory investors. And fortunately, the deals were not completely wrapped up before Schwarzenegger was replaced by Jerry Brown. And one of the first things he did was cancel all of those transactions. But just think, taxpayers have been funding for years Dulles Airport, National Airport, and the idea that they're going to take these assets that are our property and sell them to corporate interests and expect that somehow it's going to be a good deal for the taxpayers? It's just insane. Over the weekend, the conflict in Syria got even more serious. I refer to Syria as a shooting gallery, where international actors can show up with guns and airplanes and missiles and just fire away. And over the weekend, Israel got more deeply involved in Syria. The way the story is told, Israel downed what it said was an Iranian drone that had drifted into Israeli airspace. Then they struck back at what it called the command and control center in Syria, from which they say Iran launched that drone. An Israeli F-16 returning after the attack crashed in northern Israel after coming under heavy Syrian anti-aircraft fire. Pilot and co-pilot survived. This is the first Israeli jet downed under enemy fire in decades. Now, one reason for this oversized response, of course, Israel always over-responds to any perceived provocation. But Benjamin Netanyahu is expected to be indicted almost any day now. And maybe this is a way to show the Israeli people how strong and how indispensable Netanyahu believes he is. Meanwhile, on the Turkish-Syrian border, Turkey resumed its air assaults over the weekend, and they hit the enclave of Afrin, killing and wounding several people. Now, the attacks began on Thursday night and have been among the worst since the Turkish army and Ankara-based opposition fighters began a ground campaign and air campaign on the Afrin enclave 3 weeks ago. And Reese Ehrlich has a very smart comment about these issues, as we hear in this second excerpt from our in-depth interview released today.
Basically, Turkey does not want to see the Syrian Kurds control a strip of territory that's contiguous and along the Turkish border, and they're willing to ally with anyone and oppose anyone in order to do that. So they've attacked the Syrian Kurds in the area called Afrin, which is on the far western part of northern Syria, where that strip of land that I mentioned. Mm-hmm. And they are threatening to attack another city called Manjib, which is where U.S. troops are actually stationed. And the U.S. sent in tanks and armored personnel carriers with huge American flags and several high-ranking generals and someone from the New York Times to say, if you attack Manjib, Mr. Erdogan, you're going to be confronted by American forces, or at least that's the implication. So that is a huge area of dispute. There are some in Washington and in the White House saying, forget the Kurds. Turkey's more important. We've got important treaties with them. We use their Incirlik air base. It's critical for our air flights throughout the region. Forget about these Kurds. And others who are saying, no, we need the Kurds because if we're going to dismember Syria, we've got to have somebody on the ground to do it with. And these guys seem to be the best ones.
That's journalist Reese Ehrlich, and I invite you to hear the full interview at peterbcollins.com. And finally today, Trump gave an interview to Sheldon Adelson's free newspaper that's distributed all over Israel. It's called Israel Hayam. And I kind of expected him to back Netanyahu in his investigation of corruption, and I expected him to praise Netanyahu for his strong response to the Syrian events on Saturday. But Trump had some surprises. Right now, he told Adelson's newspaper, I would say the Palestinians are not looking to make peace, and I'm not necessarily sure that Israel is looking to make peace. So we're just going to have to see what happens. He also made this comment, the settlements are something that very much complicates and always have complicated making peace. So I think Israel has to be very careful with the settlements. Now, if Obama had said that, AIPAC and all of the pro-Zionist elected officials in this country would have been all over him. It is amazing what kind of double standards we have. Trump acknowledged that the prospect of peace talks now seem far-fetched, but doesn't seem to think that his designation of Israel, of Jerusalem as the capital and the place where the U.S. Embassy will move next year, he doesn't think that impacted things. Final quote here, I don't know, frankly, if we're going to even have talks. We will see what happens, but I think it's very foolish for the Palestinians, and I also think it would be very foolish for the Israelis if they don't make a deal. Thanks for listening to my daily news and comment podcast. We give it away free, and you're free to share it as far and wide as you can. We also post it on YouTube, where people in Thailand check it out. Thanks. I'm Peter B.
Happy trails to you until we meet again. Happy trails to you. Keep smiling.